You are standing in Ice Age Europe wearing what can be described as a dead animal with ambition. It is warm when you stand still. Then you start walking. The hide slides off one shoulder, cold air rushes underneath. Every thorn discovers your thighs. You grab the skin with one hand, which is unfortunate because that hand was supposed to hold a spear. What you need is not more fur. You need the fur to stay where the useful parts of your body are. That sounds obvious now. We live in a world of sleeves, seams, pockets, buttons, zippers, and labels, warning us not to wash anything above 30 degrees. But for most of human evolution, turning a flat animal skin into clothing shaped around shoulders, elbows, knees, and feet was an engineering problem. And here is where the neat story breaks. Humans may have made fitted garments with sharp awls long before the first-eyed needles appeared. The needle may not have invented sewing. It may have made sewing faster, finer, and eventually decorative. So why did humans begin joining pieces of hide? The answer involves wind, migration, microscopic polish on bone tools, Ice Age fashion, and the moment a survival shell became social language. But first, how do you persuade a dead animal to fit a living human? The short answer is simple. Humans started sewing because wrapping the body was not enough. A loose hide can cover you. It cannot reliably follow you. Run, climb, crouch, carry firewood, drag meat, throw a spear, or crawl into a shelter, and the material shifts. Gaps open, warm air escapes. The hide twists around your legs. One badly placed flap turns a hunting trip into an argument between you and your own clothing. Sewing solved several problems at once. It closed openings where wind entered. It joined smaller pieces into something large enough to cover the body. It shaped material around shoulders, hips, knees, and feet. And when a garment tore, people could repair the damaged section instead of preparing an entirely new hide. Animal skin was not free. Someone had to hunt the animal, remove the hide, scrape it, stretch it, soften it, and stop it from becoming a stiff, rotting sheet with an unforgettable smell. A few stitches could preserve days of labor. But this is where the answer becomes frustrating. We cannot point to the first sewn coat or the first person who made it. Hide decays. Sinew disappears. Plant fiber becomes soil. The entire sewing project can vanish while one small bone tool survives for tens of thousands of years. So archaeologists are not usually searching for the first shirt. They are searching for the objects that touched it. To understand why sewing mattered, you need to understand what clothing is actually doing. A fur hide does not keep you warm simply because fur is warm. It works by trapping a thin layer of air close to the skin. Your body heats that air, and if the air stays still, it becomes insulation. The problem is movement. Every time a loose hide lifts, twists, or opens, wind replaces that warm air with cold air. Your body has to heat the new air all over again. Then the wind steals that too. It is a terrible subscription service, except the monthly payment is body heat. A sewn garment controls those openings. It can narrow the neck, close the sides, form sleeves and leg coverings, and wrap the foot without falling off after 6 steps. Most importantly, it can trap warmth while remaining loose enough for the joints to move. And joints are the real engineering problem. The human body is not a convenient rectangle. Shoulders rotate, elbows bend, knees fold, hips move in several directions, apparently because evolution enjoys making tailoring difficult. A flat hide has to be cut and joined so it can move with all of those parts without tearing, slipping, or turning the wearer into a fur-covered statue. That is what sewing really changed. It did not just add more material. It gave humans control over the empty space between material and skin. It allowed them to place protection exactly where the body needed it and keep it there while walking, hunting, climbing, carrying, and sleeping. But did they need an eyed needle to do that? Probably not. And that is where the standard story begins to come apart. The usual story goes like this. Humans entered cold country. They wrapped themselves in hides. Then someone invented the needle, and fitted clothing appeared. Clean. Logical. Almost certainly too neat. Long before archaeologists find clear-eyed needles, they find sharp bone tools that could pierce soft material. At Blombo's Cave and Sibutu in southern Africa, delicate bone awls appear in layers dating roughly between 76,000 and 61,000 years ago. The earliest widely accepted eyed needles in Eurasia arrive much later. That changes the sequence. With an awl, you do not need a hole in the tool itself. You press the point through hide, remove it, and then feed sinew, cord, or plant fiber through the opening. Make another hole. Repeat. Slow, awkward, and probably excellent at testing the patience of everyone near the fire, but entirely capable of fastening material together. An eyed needle combines those steps. The point opens the path while the thread follows immediately behind it. That makes smaller stitches, curved seams, repeated repairs, and more controlled joining much easier. But archaeologists have to be careful. A pointed bone is not automatically a sewing tool. It might have pierced baskets, worked leather, made holes in ornaments, or served another purpose entirely. Shape gives us possibilities. Where marks and archaeological context narrow them. Neither preserves a label saying, "First Prehistoric Tailor." So the needle probably did not create sewing from nothing. It refined an older system of piercing and lacing. And the clearest clues to that older system are tiny enough to disappear in your hand. Now here is the part nobody expected. The clothing is gone, so archaeologists have to question the tool. At Blombo's cave on the southern coast of South Africa, researchers uncovered carefully shaped bone objects from layers dating roughly 76,000 to 71,000 years ago. Many were long, narrow, and polished to sharp points. They are usually classified as awls, tools designed to puncture rather than cut. An awl looks unimpressive. It is essentially a pointed piece of bone, but its surface can preserve a record of movement. When bone is repeatedly pushed through another material, the tip changes. Tiny scratches develop, high points become rounded. Friction creates polish in particular locations. The pattern is not a prehistoric video recording, unfortunately, but it can reveal how the tool met resistance and how it moved through whatever was being worked. To investigate this, archaeologists shape replica tools, use them on hides, plants, soil, and other materials. Then compare the resulting microscopic damage with wear on the ancient objects. Analyses of the Blombo's tools indicate that many of the pointed pieces were used to perforate relatively soft material, possibly well-worked hide. That would make sense for producing clothing, carrying bags, or other objects made from skin. But possibly matters. The same hole-making technology could serve several purposes, and no microscopic scratch contains a helpful note saying, "This one was for the left sleeve." Still, consider what these tools imply. Someone selected suitable bone, shaped it, maintained the point, and used it repeatedly. If the goal was clothing, the process probably involved placing holes along prepared hide and pulling sinew, cord, or plant fiber through them. Hole by hole, pull by pull, long before a needle could carry its own thread. And Blombo's adds another complication. The broader archaeological sequence also contains engraved ochre and pierced shell beads. These people were not merely covering bodies and moving on. They were modifying materials carefully and using objects on the body in socially meaningful ways. That does not prove the beads were sewn onto clothing. It does show that protection, craftsmanship, and display were already sharing the same cave. The evidence is powerful. It is also inconvenient. We have the tool. We have the wear. We have the surrounding behavior. What we do not have is the thing being sewn. And then someone decided the sharp bone needed a hole. That is a much harder idea than it sounds. To make an eyed needle, a craftsperson first needed a suitable sliver of bone, ivory, or antler. It had to be cut narrow, scraped into shape, ground smooth, and sharpened without becoming so thin that it snapped. Then came the absurd part: drilling a tiny opening through one end of an already fragile object using stone tools. Push too hard and the needle breaks. Drill too close to the edge and the eye splits. Spend an afternoon doing everything correctly, make one bad movement, and congratulations, you have invented two useless pieces of bone. From roughly 40,000 years ago onward, eyed needles begin appearing in parts of northern Eurasia. Denisova Cave in southern Siberia preserves an early example, while other finds appear across Siberia, the Caucasus, East Asia, and Europe. The exact dating and cultural attribution of the earliest specimens remain debated. The eye changed the motion of sewing. With an awl, you puncture the hide, remove the tool, then feed cord through the opening. With a needle, the thread follows the point directly through the material. The stitch can be smaller, the spacing can be more regular. A curved seam becomes easier to control. A tear can be repaired without opening enormous holes along its edges, and finer work creates new possibilities. You can shape material around a foot, join a sleeve without large gaps, stitch thin layers beneath heavier skins, and repair damage before it spreads. Eventually, you can add beads, pendants, or edging with far greater precision. Another caution matters. Denisova Cave was used at different times by Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens. Finding a needle there does not automatically tell us which group made it. The tool survived. The tailor did not leave a signature. What survived instead was a new level of control. The awl allowed humans to fasten hides. The eyed needle allowed them to design seams. So what was sewing probably for first? Not fashion, not ceremony. Not because someone looked at a perfectly functional hide and decided the neckline needed work. The strongest early reasons were practical. First, sealing the body against cold. A sewn seam could close the side of a garment, narrow the opening around the neck, and keep wind from lifting the material away from the skin. In freezing conditions, that was not a small improvement. It was the difference between carrying a warm layer and actually wearing one. Second, movement. A garment that stays attached to the body leaves both hands free. You can carry a spear, gather wood, lift a child, climb over rock, or drag part of an animal back to camp without repeatedly stopping to rescue your clothing from your ankles. Third, repair. Prepared hide cost time, energy, and risk. It had to be removed without ruin, scraped, stretched, dried, softened, and sometimes treated with fat or smoke. Throwing away an entire garment because one edge tore would have been an impressive commitment to waste. Sewing made material reusable. A damaged section could be patched. Smaller skins could be joined into something larger. Good pieces from worn garments could be removed and used again. Humans were no longer trapped by the natural size and shape of one animal. That may have been sewing's most important change. It made clothing modular. A hide could be cut into parts, rearranged and rebuilt around the human body. A narrow piece became a sleeve. Several scraps became a foot covering. One damaged panel could be replaced without starting over. The earliest purpose probably varied by place. In warm regions, sewing may have helped protect skin from thorns, sun, and insects. In cold regions, it became thermal engineering. Everywhere, it made protection more reliable. And once humans could rebuild animal skin into almost any shape, clothing stopped being something they found. It became something they designed. And this may not have been only our story. Neanderthals were working animal skins long before the eyed needle became common in the archaeological record. At two sites in southwestern France, Pech de la Zaye I and Abri-Péronny, researchers found fragments of specialized bone tools called lissoirs smoothers made from animal ribs. Their rounded, polished ends preserve wear consistent with pressing and rubbing against hides, much like tools still used to make leather softer and more flexible. Even the choice of bone was deliberate. Several lissoirs were made from the ribs of large bovids, such as bison or aurochs, despite smaller ungulates being more common in some of the layers. Neanderthals apparently understood that different bones behaved differently and selected material suited to the job. Then there is the lion skin. At Einhornhöhle in Germany, archaeologists identified cave lion toe bones at least 190,000 years old, with cut marks interpreted as evidence that the claws remained attached to a carefully removed pelt. The researchers proposed that Neanderthals brought the skin into the cave, perhaps for warmth, comfort, display, or some combination of all three. That is remarkable. It is also not proof of sewing. A processed hide could become clothing, but it could also become bedding, a shelter covering, a container, or an extremely intimidating cave decoration. A lissoir proves sophisticated leatherworking. It does not preserve a seam. So different human populations clearly understood how to transform animal skin. Whether they all stitched it in the same way and whether eyed needles emerged once or were invented repeatedly remains uncertain. The technology solved the body problem. Then humans gave clothing another job entirely. Once humans could shape clothing precisely, they discovered something extremely predictable. They decorated it. The urge to make the body communicate was already ancient. At Bismoon Cave in Morocco, perforated shell beads appear in deposits dating to at least 142,000 years ago. At Blombos Cave, People were stringing and wearing carefully selected shell beads around 75,000 years ago, long before eyed needles became widespread. Microscopic wear around the perforations shows that these shells were not simply collected and dropped on the cave floor, they had been threaded and worn. That does not mean the beads were sewn onto shirts. They may have hung from cords, hair, skin coverings, or other vanished objects. But they show humans were already using things placed on the body to communicate identity, membership, status, relationships, or meanings we can no longer reconstruct. An eyed needle gave that behavior a larger surface. A fitted garment could hold rows of shells, teeth, beads, colored edging, or patterned repairs, without everything sliding into one decorative pile near the waist. Placement became controllable. A design could appear on the shoulder, around the neck, across the chest, or along a seam. Researchers have therefore proposed that eyed needles helped mark a transition from clothing as protection to clothing as dress, a social system in which what covered the body also communicated who the wearer was. The interpretation is plausible, but no needle can prove why its owner made a particular stitch. Still, the larger pattern is difficult to ignore. A seam first told the wind to stay outside. Then it told other humans who was inside. Once clothing could display identity, warm enough was no longer the end of the design process. Apparently, it never has been. But sewing did not simply free humans from the environment. It made them dependent on a new one. A fitted garment required more than an animal skin. Someone needed to know how to remove the hide without tearing it, clean it, soften it, cut it into useful shapes, make cord, produce a sharp tool, and join the pieces without wasting material. An eyed needle might take hours to manufacture and seconds to break. The finished clothing was not just an object. It was stored knowledge. That knowledge allowed humans to enter places their naked bodies could not tolerate for long. But it also meant survival increasingly depended on skills carried inside the group. Lose the person who knew how to prepare hides, lose access to suitable bone, lose the method for twisting strong thread. Suddenly, your species has not changed. The climate has not changed. But your protection has disappeared. Culture had become part of the human body, not biologically, practically. A child born into a cold environment did not inherit a coat through DNA. They inherited people who knew how to make one. That chain had to remain unbroken through demonstration, imitation, correction, and probably many conversations beginning with the prehistoric equivalent of, "No, not like that." And once clothing became social language, it could also divide. Rare materials, careful stitching, decoration, and skilled labor could reveal who had access to resources. Clothing could signal belonging, which means it could also signal exclusion. We cannot claim that the first needle invented rank, inequality, or fashion judgment, but it helped create a surface on which those things could eventually be displayed. Sewing protected humans from climate. It also tied their survival and increasingly their identity to other humans. So, why did humans start sewing their clothes? The honest answer is that there was probably no single invention, no first tailor, and no moment when one person suddenly understood the entire idea. What we know with reasonable confidence is that ancient humans were processing animal hides very early. Bone awls capable of piercing soft material appear long before eyed needles become common in the archaeological record. By around 40,000 years ago, people in parts of Eurasia were making delicate needles with drilled eyes, allowing thread to follow the point directly through the material. What those tools strongly suggest is a gradual technological sequence. People probably began by wrapping and tying hides. Then they pierced holes and laced edges together. Later, eyed needles made stitching smaller, faster, more controlled, and easier to use on curved seams, thin layers, repairs, and decoration. The strongest early motives were practical, keeping clothing attached during movement, blocking wind, trapping warmth, joining small pieces, and repairing valuable material. Social display probably became increasingly important as clothing grew more precise and durable. But uncertainty remains. We cannot identify the first stitch. We cannot assume every awl made clothing. We cannot always determine which human population made a particular needle. And we do not know whether sewing was invented once and spread, or appeared independently in several places. The real answer is less dramatic than a lone genius beside a fire. Humans started sewing because wrapping had reached its limits. A loose hide could cover the body. A seam could transform it. Look down at whatever you are wearing. It probably began as a flat piece of material. Then, someone cut it apart, folded the edges, joined the pieces, and placed seams around the exact locations where your body refuses to remain flat. Shoulders, armpits, hips, knees, and feet. Those seams are solving the same problem ancient humans faced. How do you make a surface follow a moving body? The materials have changed. Bone became metal. Sinew became linen, wool, cotton, nylon, and polyester. A task that once required hours beside a fire can now disappear inside an industrial machine moving faster than the eye can follow. But the basic idea has barely changed. Cut the material, make a hole, pull something through, join one edge to another. That dead animal with ambition from the beginning finally succeeded. It stopped sliding off the shoulder because humans learned to take it apart and rebuild it in the shape of themselves. At first they sewed because loose hides could not run, climb, hunt, or survive winter with them. Then, because humans are humans, they used the same seams to display skill, identity, beauty, wealth, belonging, and occasionally pockets too small to hold anything useful. The seam on your shoulder is not just a manufacturing detail. It is a tiny solution to a problem tens of thousands of years old. The animal skin finally learned to behave. We are still complaining about the fit,